Today we're going to discuss 10 shocking myths about atheism that you often hear people say, and we're going to go through each of them and debunk them.
Today we're looking at Jaclyn Glenn's 10 shocking myths about atheism, and we're going to jump in right now.
Myth number 1, atheism is a belief system. Many people, and a lot of people say this, and it gets under my skin probably the most, people say that it's a belief system like any other religion. In reality, atheism is just the lack of a belief in any god or gods. It's not a structured belief system with doctrines and rituals or holy books. And I use this example a lot. If you are asymptomatic, it means you are not having symptoms of something. If you are an atheist, you just don't have religion. And since we're talking about belief, I'd also like to mention knowledge. There is the term agnostic. The root of the word agnostic is gnostic, which means knowledge. So just as asymptomatic means no symptoms, or atheist means no belief in a deity, agnostic means to not have knowledge. I personally think that everybody is agnostic. Nobody has answers that aren't out there.
Okay, so I'm going to have more to say about this in just a few minutes, but it's actually really interesting that an agnostic who we have had on the show, Steve McRae, and we had him on to talk about a paper that he wrote on this question of how should atheism be properly defined. He's written a paper on this that some philosophers have looked at, we've looked at and gone over with him, that seeks to show that if you go with this understanding of atheism, that it's like a lack of a belief in God rather than the belief that God does not exist or something like that, then you end up with some sort of a semantic collapse where one could be a theist, an agnostic, and an atheist. Here's a video on the screen that you can check out on the channel and listen to the entire case on that. But for our purposes right here, I'm just going to let him speak for himself a little bit about this idea of atheism as a belief system and about the term atheism and what it should mean.
Atheism, as we know, is the proposition that theism is false, the belief that there is no God. That's how it is in academic as standard, as in normative, as in the usual understanding. Matter of fact, 99% of every paper I ever read uses that usage. So for Jaclyn to say that atheism is only one thing is automatically by fiat wrong. And so she's out there saying that atheism is not a belief, atheism is not a religion, which is not. Obviously, atheism is not a religion, but atheism is a belief. And she says it's not a belief system, throwing that word system like it makes a difference. Look, a system can have one element. I left her a message on her video. I publicly challenge you to a formal debate, to formally debate me on this subject or discussion. You are absolutely wrong about agnosticism and Gnosticism. You are grossly wrong in just about everything you say in the first myth. I didn't even get past the first myth. You have a sizable platform and you're still parroting the same misinformation that you always have. It is still as wrong as it always was. I want to sincerely and openly challenge you to defend your claims in fair public debate on Trinity Radio with Dr. Braxton Hunter, moderating and hosting. Braxton Hunter, nice guy, very nice guy. I've been on his channel, Trinity Radio, which is a YouTube channel with him and Dr. Pritchett. And it was Dr. Pritchett that actually found an error in my paper about a year ago. He found a logical error. Well, no, I'm sorry. He didn't find a logical error. He found just a word that should have been a different word. That's it. I used the word subalternation and it should have been some contrary. And here's the funniest thing. He understood the paper well enough to do that. Most people are not going to know the difference between a subalternation and a subcontrary, but he did.
Now, the only other thing I really want to say about this is that the truth is when you look at something like atheism, now later she's going to talk about it being similar to lacking a belief in leprechauns or unicorns or something like that. Well, those things, when you remove the belief in leprechauns or the belief in unicorns from your belief system, if someone had those in their belief system, everything in your belief system has some effect on the whole, I guess. But when you remove those kinds of things, it doesn't impact the majority of your beliefs in the same way, the majority of your worldview, like it would if you had theism in there and you removed theism. If you had a belief in God in your web of beliefs or in your worldview, and then you suddenly removed that. Now, notice I'm not saying you had atheism implanted there. I'm saying, all right, fine. Even if you wanted to go with this lack of belief thing, when you remove God from the belief system, or it isn't there to begin with, then what you have as a result is a change. It seems that there are some commonalities that tend, now we're not saying everyone, we're speaking in generalities here, but some commonalities that do tend to emerge in a person who doesn't have theism in their worldview. Obviously not everyone, but for example, if you look at, I think it's the Pew Research data on this, we've done episodes on this before, there's a video on the channel called Is Atheism a Worldview? And you can check that one out. And it seems like certain things, like for example, in the high 90 something percentile, or at least over 90%, if if they are atheists, then they end up being very much on the same page when it comes to a lot of social issues like abortion and LGBT type stuff. And there are other things that have to do with what can be taught in the classroom and science and all of that, that if you lack a belief in God, you end up having these commonalities. Now, I'm not going to say that atheism is a worldview or is a belief system, but there can be beliefs. Like for me, I think that everyone's worldview is slightly different. You might have different perspectives on minor things here or there. So when I talk about Christians, I don't say they have a Christian world, or I don't say that they have the Christian worldview. I say they have a Christian worldview if they're an Orthodox Christian, because their worldview is specific and it may have slightly different things in it on minor issues that mine doesn't as a fellow Christian. In the same way, I wouldn't say that atheism is a belief system or is a religion. What I would say about it is that a person who does not have theism in their belief system is someone who has an atheist or agnostic belief system, right? Now, the agnostic Steve McRae had some pretty straightforward things to say to Jaclyn about this. We don't want to leave that where it is. Hey, Jaclyn, if you want to talk to him about that, I would love to host a debate between the two of you on atheism or whatever other topic you guys want to discuss related to this. So the ball's in your court, Jaclyn.
Myth number 2, atheists have no morals. One of the most persistent myths is that atheists have no moral compass. Truth is, morality doesn't require religion and oftentimes is better without it. But atheists can and do follow ethical principles on empathy and social well-being.
Okay, so I want to point out that she's using language like many people or some people or I've certainly known people and things like that rather than speaking in generalizations.
Many people, and a lot of people say that. A lot of people think that atheists, and some people even say that atheists, some people who are not religious might actually enjoy life even more. I've also heard people say that I also can't even begin to tell you how many lives have been dimmed by religion.
And I understand why someone would do that, but it makes it a little bit difficult because the truth is there are people in almost any group who might say almost any old thing. But what most people are talking about when they're talking about morality with you and as it relates to atheism or theism is they're basically saying that it's not that atheists can't act morally. I mean, look, let me help you out here. The truth is all you have to do is find one atheist who has contributed to some actually good charity or helped one little old lady across the street. And guess what? You've got an atheist acting morally. So yes, of course, atheists can act morally. And of course, theists, and of course, Christians can act immorally. This is just the state of affairs. The question is, when you are acting morally, why is that moral? What is the foundation for that? What supports that? What explains all of that? How do we understand all of those things? What we're saying is that you don't have any moral foundation for those things. That's what most Christians or most theists are trying to say about this. Now, there may be other, you could be some kind of a non-natural moral realist. You could have some sort of Platonic ideas about morality or something. I'm just saying that in this paradigm, when people are talking about atheist immorality, they're not saying you can't be moral. Maybe you've met some people or certain people that are that way. But really what they're saying is you have no ultimate foundation. If you've kind of fabricated your morality or gone with the morality that originates in your own mind or based on what you think the culture approves of or that sort of thing, then what you've done is you've constructed like a moral bubble for that group of people to live within. But if you think it's wrong, for example, or that people shouldn't, let's say, do acts of kindness, or people shouldn't prevent people from gender transition, let's say, or people shouldn't steal, kill, or hurt other people. If you want to say, or people shouldn't think of abortion as a bad thing, they should think of it as a woman's choice. When you want to start taking these shoulds and shouldn'ts that are important to you, I'm imagining, within your moral sphere, you got to understand that if there's not some overarching moral sphere, if there's not some ultimate morality, some objective morality, I might call it actual morality that hangs over all of that, then you can hold people accountable in your moral sphere if they agree with you. But if there's another moral sphere of people over here that don't agree with you about those things, you have no basis from this moral sphere to say to those people in that moral sphere, you should or shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, because you're just talking about your own fabricated morality. What about their fabricated morality that's based on their thinking, their context, their position? And who says they have to care about what you care about in this regard? And you might say, well, because it's best for their happiness or it's best for their flourishing. Who says they have to be concerned about that? Well, they are concerned about that. Okay, well, now we're talking about something completely different. The reality is that if you're going to say that there's not an ultimate objective morality, then the idea comes that that's really, you're just kind of, now we're just talking about in your moral sphere what you like and what you don't like versus what somebody else likes or doesn't like. And you call that morality. But understand that the way we talk about that is that's just kind of your fabricated morality based on subjective goals, ultimately.
Myth number 3, atheists think that everything is random. Some myths claim that atheists believe that everything in the universe came about by chance. But natural selection itself is not random at all. The survival and reproductive success of an individual is directly related to the ways its inherited traits function in the context of its local environment.
You're right. It might not be random in the sense that you're describing things here, but I really doubt that's what most theists mean when they talk about this all happening by chance or being random. What they mean there is it happened without an intelligence, without any setup, without any purpose. It means that when we look around at these things, and what we're talking about here is pretty heavy. We're talking about all the complexity in the universe, all of the consciousness that we have, all of these kind of things, life, all of that. It just, this deeply complex and finely tuned universe, it just all kind of happened that way without, like kind of left to its own devices, just left as it is, just kind of did it on its own without planning, without any sort of intended structure. And that does seem pretty interesting. That does seem pretty impressive. So no, it does, maybe not in the sense that you're talking about, like there are systems that develop and then of course maybe it's not random, but it's random in the sense that there was no overarching intelligence or planning that led to all of this. I mean, that's definitely true, right? I mean, that's obviously true definitionally. So what are we fussing about?
As for our origins as an atheist, I say I don't know. Scary words for a lot of people. Yes, there are theories, but if we get down to the very bottom of all of it, there are a lot of unanswered questions. I just simply don't want to fill in the blank with God because I don't know.
Now, I'm going to repeat what I said already this week in another video, and that is that I actually think it's admirable to say you don't know if you don't know. I think it's dangerous to say you do know or act like you do know if you don't know. But on the other hand, this does seem to come up, this claim from atheists that I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of claims about what they know about science, from science and all that, incredibly bizarre things that seem counterintuitive, things like we find in quantum mechanics and things like that. But it's really interesting to me. This often comes up when we're talking about issues related to origins. Well, that seems awfully convenient there. Now, I'm not saying that's what she's doing here. But I think that's something we got to watch out for.
Which brings me back to the idea that atheism is not a belief system. We also don't believe actively that the universe came from nothing. You might find people who make arguments for it or against it. I don't really care. At the bottom line, atheism has nothing to do with that. It's really just not believing in God, guys. It's not that complicated. And just because the origins of life may be unknown, even though I'm an atheist, with all my lack of morality and stuff, I do care about the sustainability of our life. According to a recent report, last year likely represented the peak of carbon emissions from the electricity sector. I might not know all the origins of life, but I would like for all of us to keep enjoying it.
Yeah, so here she just goes off about climate change for some reason. And I thought at first, is this some kind of a product promotion or something? But it doesn't seem to be. I cut it off. You can go watch it in the original video, which is linked in the description. But it seems like really all she was trying to do is just to show that she does have some moral impulses. She says something like she doesn't know about the origin, but she wants to continue to enjoy the environment or whatever. So she's got her morality and she's focused on the environment with some of that. That's great, but we don't think that that it's impossible for atheists to do anything moral. And on top of that, this does nothing to ameliorate the issues about the origin of the universe.
Which brings me to myth number 4. Atheism makes people feel like life is meaningless and may even lead to nihilism. A lot of people think that atheists, without having belief in some kind of deity, feel that life is totally meaningless. Like, what's the point of being here? And some people even say that atheism will inevitably lead to nihilism, which is the belief that life is meaningless. While, of course, some atheists may be nihilists, and people of all types could be nihilists. Many of us find rich and fulfilling sources of meaning without religious belief. don't worry, we're okay.
So yeah, you can come up with your own sort of meaning and purpose, some sort of Jean-Paul Sartrean kind of existential atheism project, and people do that all the time. When you come up with your own meaning and purpose like that, understand that you're now talking about something different than what the theist is talking about when he or she is talking about meaning or purpose, and so you end up talking past each other. And what we mean by this is when the theist is talking about purpose or meaning, they're talking about something we might call ultimate meaning or objective meaning, or we might just say actual meaning. Now, before that sounds insulting to you, realize that on the position that was just described by the atheist, where you choose your own meaning or purpose for your life, and the fact there is this is a fabricated meaning. This is not an objective overarching meaning or an actual meaning, as I call it. This is fabricated meaning. Now, that's not to say it's not meaningful to you. I get that, but it's fabricated meaning. It means you made it up. I mean, that's what it has to mean. You chose it. Now, if you fabricate meaning, that's all well and good, and maybe that's just how it is. And if that's how it is, that's how it is whether we like it or not. But understand where this places us. This puts us in a similar situation as with morality and the discussion that we had there. Because if someone else decides that their purpose is something that you think it's wrong for someone's purpose to be, or isn't their purpose, or shouldn't be their purpose, you're left in a really awkward place. For example, if we're talking about fabricated purpose instead of actual purpose or overarching purpose, then what we're saying is that people choose their own meaning and purpose. So if someone chooses that their meaning and purpose should be to try and assassinate the former president of the United States, you can't say to them consistently that, well, that's not your purpose. Now, you might say, well, okay, but I can still hold them morally culpable for what they do, even if they choose their own purpose. Well, you could, but there's not some overarching morality. So you kind of run into this problem either way you go here. Now, maybe, as I said before, we just have to grit our teeth and recognize that maybe there is no God. And if there is no God, then there's no meaning and there's no morality, at least in this overarching ultimate sense. And so the best we can do is just to come up with our own meaning and align with some particular group's morality and all of that sort of thing. But as with morality, when it comes to meaning, the reason I think that for the human race there is a purpose, an overarching purpose, and maybe for your own individual life, is because we seem to have access to that meaning and an awareness of it that is incredibly strong. Now, think about this. You could respond to what I just said and say, well, you're just saying it really seems like it, or it would be nice if it was true. Well, it really seems like it, but that kind of is ultimately pretty important, because when we're talking about arguments, you have to decide whether a certain premise seems strong to you, right? And a good argument will be one in which the premises are more likely to be true than false. But that means you'd have to come up with some sort of an argument to show me that meaning is not ultimate in this sense, that where the premises are stronger, if I'm to accept it, than my own immediate awareness that there is meaning and purpose. Think about this similar thing. What kind of an argument would it take to demonstrate to you that you don't exist? You instantly know that there is no such argument. Well, why not? Well, because there's no conceivable premise of any argument that could possibly be stronger than your immediate awareness that you do exist. And so, though I'm admitting that with meaning and purpose and morality and things like that, it's not quite as stark as that. I'm saying it's enough like that I've not yet met the argument where the premises are strong enough to overcome what seems obvious to me in my own eyes.
Which brings me to myth number 5. Atheists are unhappy people. There's the stereotype that we're all walking around super depressed. And let me tell you, depression, it affects all types. But again, happiness does not depend on religious belief. Atheists are perfectly fine finding happiness in various aspects of life.
I agree that atheists can be happy. They can find happiness in that sense. And theists can be really sad and really depressed. Although, while we're on this, if we are talking about generalities now, then I'll just, for the second time in as many videos, throw this up on the screen.
You have one life. There's no magical afterlife, pearly gates waiting for you. So enjoy it while it lasts.
Now, here she claims that there is no afterlife waiting for you. Where did she get this information that gives her such a strong knowledge claim? Does she know that? Just kind of makes me want to say,
prove it. Says who?
I've also heard people say that they're okay to basically sacrifice or postpone their happiness until they're dead, basically. They don't pursue what they want to pursue while they're on earth. And I'm not even saying heathenistic things, right? I'm just saying they don't pursue their passions, and they make endless sacrifices and live sort of a miserable life because they're waiting for some sort of reward that personally I don't think is ever going to happen. How sad and depressing is that? I've actually seen that play out in various different ways, and it's pretty heartbreaking.
So again, we don't really get any specifics about the cases that she's talking about. What are you referring to? What's the scenario that you kind of have in mind? Now, I didn't include this, it's in the original video, but she does talk a little bit about how LGBT individuals who are in this sort of setting, that it can be sad for them and that sort of thing. I have whole videos on that, and I'll encourage you to check those out on the channel. But then she moves on to these kind of ambiguous scenarios where there are these people that she has in mind that she's certainly encountered who have just, they have no concern for happiness in their earthly life at all. I really haven't met too many of these kind of people. But these are people that are living really for the next life and maybe living completely for the next life. And this makes them really sad, or probably we more rightly say make that whole thing sounds really sad to Jaclyn Glenn. But we don't really have anything, solid to sink our teeth in here to even see if we agree with the premise that she's making, that it's a sad state of affairs. She would have to give us more specifics. And this is one thing that I noticed in the video responses, or at least the last video response I made to Christy Burke and now with her, is we get these ambiguous claims about certain people or someone out there. And if we're not given specifics, I have absolutely no way of knowing how to even agree with you or where to agree with you about which aspects of this. I may not agree at all. There are many situations for believers that might seem kind of sad to unbelievers, but that's the way that we choose to live our lives, or the way we want to live our lives, that does bring us some level of happiness and contentment. So I just don't know what you're saying to know how to respond.
Myth number 6. Atheists hate God. It's super common to hear that you're just an atheist because you're angry at God, or you went through something in your life and it made you mad at Jesus. It's like, no, I just don't believe that, either of those things exist. I mean, I say either of those things, but really it's supposed to be one thing. It's all very confusing. But no, we're not mad at God. We might be mad at religion or the consequences that religion has on people, but to be mad at something that doesn't exist, it's just not a thing. Literally, not a thing. Atheists typically reject the idea of God instead of harboring some sort of anger towards it. Him, them, they, them, I don't know. And just so you guys know, I'm also not harboring any judgment against unicorns that I don't think are real. I don't lose sleep over being pissed off at unicorns. You just can't be mad at something that you don't think exists.
Yeah, I'm fine with this, except for the fact that I do want to point out there are atheists who are just mad at God. Now, I realize that doesn't even sound consistent when we're talking about it, but there have been many people who have become Christians who were identifying as atheists, at least, who say that, that I was mad at God during that period of time. Now, you can just discount all of those, but that doesn't really seem fair. The next approach would be to say something like, well, look, if you're mad at God, then that's not an atheist, because that means you're mad at this being who you must think exists if you're mad at him. But yet then that means you're not an atheist, because atheists don't believe that such a God exists. Really back up from the table here and realize that not everyone's worldview is quite as tidy as it should be. I mean, there can be atheists who go to some alleged haunted location, and because of the vibe and because they maybe are caught up in the moment, they get a little bit spooked out about the possibility of ghosts or something. It doesn't mean they're not an atheist. It just means that we don't live entirely consistently all the time. And so certainly it can be atheists who are atheists, but they get caught up in the moment and they get mad, and that anger is directed perhaps toward God. It doesn't mean that they're not atheists anymore. It just means that not everyone has a completely tidy worldview. But in general, if you tell me you don't believe in God and you're not mad at God, I'm just going to believe you about that and just look for you to explain to me why you don't believe or what problems you have with the arguments and reasons that I give.
Myth number 7, atheism is just another religion. Now, we sort of tackled this in the atheism being a belief thing, but let's expand. Not worshiping any god or gods, not even believing that any god or gods exist. It's just the absence of doing something that a lot of people are doing. And just because something is popular doesn't mean something is true. Not believing in your religion is not a religion in and of itself. I feel the need to say this many, many times and almost double it in this video, because this one pisses me off so much and you hear it all of the time. Atheism lacks the key elements of religion, such as believing in a deity, rituals, religious texts.
That's funny. But did she kind of just tell on herself a little bit there?
Unless you are an a-leprechaunist,
And leprechauns.
and you go out of your way to actively not believe in leprechauns, you think about it day and night, it basically consumes you, you tithe to it. If you don't believe in leprechauns, I'll let you off the hook, and I will not say that that in and of itself is a religion. That's what I feel like you're saying to me.
I wouldn't say that atheism is a religion. What I would say about it is that a person who does not have theism in their belief system is someone who has an atheist or agnostic belief system, right?
Myth number 8, atheists can't explain miracles. Miracles are often cited as evidence of a deity because, circular logic. I often see the same thing with religious texts like, well, the Bible is proof of God, which I can agree to as much as I think Harry Potter books prove that Hogwarts is real. Atheists generally view miracles with skepticism and will want proof. The burden of proof lies on the person claiming the miracles are real, right? Not the people who are kind of raising an eyebrow at it.
Miracles as evidence for God are circular. No, they're not. You can't just approach something like this and throw out the name of some logical fallacy and dust your hands. The reality is that what we're talking about here is evident, like the way it's done is miracles are presented by Christian apologists in an evidential way with an eye toward, convincing someone that this miracle really did happen and that the best explanation for it is some sort of divine intervention. There are people that do this all the time. Yeah, if you want to react to miracles, we're not asking you to engage in circular reasoning. We're asking you to deal with what people have done, like Craig Keener and his massive work on miracles, or that my friend Caleb Jackson, who goes on channels all the time and is working on a book, but he presents these evidential cases all over the place, or even Lee Strobel in his Case for Miracles book. I mean, we've presented what we think are evidential examples of miracles. You need to deal with those.
Myth 9, atheists are closed-minded. Contrary to this, atheists often advocate for open-mindedness and critical thinking. A lot of us were once religious and came to atheism through questions and exploration. When you've been indoctrinated for a long time and everybody in your family and community thinks a type of way, it is definitely a difficult process to step away. It can be a lot easier to just fit in with everybody and answer God to questions that you don't have answers to.
I don't think it means you're not open-minded. I would just believe you about that. But if you are claiming that you had this open-mindedness and you walked away with your eyes wide open with a deep awareness of the faith that you were leaving behind, then I'm going to expect that you're going to be able to articulate those things in videos like this accurately as Orthodox Christians would do on issues like, let's say, the Trinity.
Which brings me to myth number 10. Atheists don't exist. Poof! I'm not real. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. They're getting at the idea that, like, deep down, you really do believe in God. Which personally I think is incredibly condescending. I mean, imagine if I went up to a religious person and I'm like, well, you might think that you're praying right now, but deep down, you know it's all bull. Although sometimes I do feel we are real and we do exist.
Now, I don't think it's the case that atheists don't exist. I don't think when someone says that they're an atheist that they're being disingenuous. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, it says, "The invisible things of God, his eternal power and divine nature, are clearly seen through what has been made, so that they," and it's talking about idolaters there, but it works, I think, just as well in this case, they are without excuse. In other words, there's enough evidence that you don't have an excuse if you don't believe. Now, if you think about something like a divine hiddenness argument, it should be obvious if Jaclyn Glenn is open and she's looking and she's waiting for it to be true and she wants it to be true, then she's non-resistant, then she should believe. The problem with that is I don't think we're required to think that you will always have this certainty right in front of you. We live in a world where there's all kinds of messaging. You can become disillusioned, your own life experience, and people can give you false information. People can give you not the best information. All kinds of things can happen. And we have deep realizations at different points in our lives. I do think that for everyone, there will come a point where you have enough that it's reasonable, or it's clear enough, or it's reasonable enough that you could believe, and you have to decide then whether you accept it or reject it. But I don't think that you're lying to me if you say you're an atheist. So again, I want to say to Jaclyn Glenn, if you would like to take Steve McRae up on his offer to debate you about what atheism and agnosticism is on Trinity Radio, I would love to host that debate. If you decide not to do it here, but to do it somewhere else or on your own channel, I think that would be great too. But again, like I've said twice now in this video, the ball's in your court on these things, and I wish you well. Jaclyn seems like a nice human being, and I'm sure that she's a wonderful person from a human perspective, and that these things were given not as personal personal attacks or anything like that. I hope you enjoyed this, and here's a video on the screen. It's when I responded to Jaclyn Glenn on a different occasion from very early on when I started the YouTube channel. I hope you'll check that out, and we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.